So the way this connects into suicide and healing is, again, that you can actually fry out diseases, tumors, things of this nature using the essentially chi practice, right? There's a deeper thing going on, and I call it Zen, and then out of that you can actually create energy. It can come off as heat from your hands, or some people have claimed to see light coming off of my forehead, like purple light, or other people have claimed to look at me and they feel like they're on DMT. Um, Maybe it's just a big eyes or whatever. I don't know. Uh, but essentially, you use this energy to enact processes, right? So your brain, you are the brain. So the brain has all the information it needs to either develop a solution, or it already has a solution and it just needs to execute that solution and focus completely on the execution. So that means, right, if you're a computer, it's more efficient, especially if you're cleaning yourself. It's entirely efficient to turn everything off completely. So you have to turn the whole thing down and then amplify this one process that essentially is being done on the context that it's clearing things, resetting them, aligning the body up with the spine, and then essentially extending the spine, releasing all of the kinks and all of this shit that's in there, the air bubbles and whatever else. And as it does that, you essentially you get more and more cerebrospinal fluid coming up your spine and into the brain. Cerebrospinal fluid creates your serotonin, your melatonin, and your DMT. So they're essentially the foundation to your mental, energetic existence, right? And then past that, you have your actual mass, which you need things like fat and food for. But as somebody like me who's skinny, you don't really get to fast your way through it and fast to the point where your body opens up and resets itself. You don't get there. Where you get is maybe after 2 days you get really deep into the sadhana. Sadhana just means work, right? In India they call that remembering. I in my perspective see remembering ancestors of the universe, of the cosmos, as synonymous with yoga, which is also aligning the body and mastering the mind or the thoughts. You can also see mastering as tuning. In music and sound engineering, mastering is actually the process of bringing a song into its cleanest but also loudest form. So you use a bunch of tools to do this. You're chopping off. You're essentially messing with like the dynamics of the top of the thing. It's usually a couple, like a third of a decibel below the 0 point or whatever the fuck. So mastering, if you want to transfer that metaphorically, it's the dialing and the tuning of all of the factors, the elements of you, and you are the song, right? So your objective might be, it can be different depending on who you are. Maybe you want to be heard, so you need to master yourself to be as clear and essentially as colorful and potable as you can be, or maybe you want to be strong, so you have to master yourself to be as as balanced with pain as you can be, so that you can work out for extended periods of time, things like that. And you essentially you can repurpose this kind of perspective onto most anything that you have enough information about, and then put it in a context of like mastery. So that's training. So mastery is just training. And essentially the process of yoga, Zen, remembering, sadhana, I'm trying to tie it all into one object so that people can see it. It's literally bringing your processes in a sort of synchronicity and alignment with themselves. And a good example of this is that you can actually have two personalities going on in your brain in regular everyday life, and people don't actually know. One of them is your right brain, and the other is your left brain. And essentially people can shift back and forth, and they can even have the right and left brain operating independently of each other. Even though they're communicating, they can actually form, it's again, it's the same thing as multiple personality disorder, except you're splitting yourself down the middle, right? And with people who have split personalities, they can do more than that. They can split themselves into 8 or split themselves into 20 fucking people or whatever else it is. But in the spirit of alignment, right? You're bringing all of your energy, your intention, your identity, your emotion, your wants and needs, and your I don't know, your goals and everything else into one space where they can operate, on themselves, on the same foundation, to sort of have the same direction, not really need to constantly deliberate amongst yourself like you're actually many people in your mind, right? Like you have one part of your mind that's managing all of your traumas and another part that's managing this, and then in your daily life you're living more or less away from all of that in the ignorance so that you can make it work. You need to smile at people. You need to do this and do that. You need to have this kind of attitude when you go to work. So you need to live in some kind of ignorance at all times so that you can more or less give people what they need, and also, not do any kind of damage to your internals, right? So you might have, I don't know, huge issues with people staring at you, but you deal with it all day anyway, and eventually it just drives you insane. And I think the same thing goes for people who don't really want to be working for the people they're working for, even if they're doing a really great job at pretending like they do. Eventually it does get to you, and you go crazy. Even if you get out of it, right, and they get you into the retirement and all this. I've known quite a lot of, I wouldn't call them elderly folks, but people who are more or less like getting there in life, getting to the other side of it. They've already had a shitload of experiences. They're trying to figure it out. And almost across the board, you find out that people have these insanely huge breakdowns in their life. They happen every 10 years or 20 years. It's always, one bad thing happens and then another bad thing happens and it all piles in on you. But the reality is that you can do that anytime. And so it's part of that mastery. It's part of the aligning yourself and sort of synchronizing these processes, these multiple personalities, even if you don't have names for them, so that when you are as you are, you're actually doing it yourself. You're not like some sort of soul in your body that's like trying to fight with God or fight with demons or fight with people who are giving you their opinions, and you're like living in some sort of cycle where you can't really overpower them and you're constantly questioning yourself. And it's not necessary. This is all, again, just like, it's part of the anxiety, the things, sort of generalized mental disorders that many people have, most people have. Right? And dissociative thoughts that you essentially just kind of have, and you don't understand them and you don't take responsibility for them. They're more or less normal. A therapist is only going to give you a hard time about that if they find out that you have those all day. But if you say, I have them while I wake up and while I go to sleep and in my dreams, and sometimes when I'm eating, and sometimes when I'm like staring at a wall, I'll have a couple weird thoughts, and they're gonna be like, yeah, dude, I have stuff like that too. Not everybody. Some people are really strong in certain areas of their life, and other people aren't. Everybody has their quirks. And what my project is generally about is to get at whatever this really deep darkness is below it that's been claiming people, right? It's not a game. Like, Brianna Mayu is a real person. Brianna Mayu really killed herself. Brianna Mayu really fucking threw herself in front of a tractor. I actually met this girl. I actually hung out with her for a day. I listened to her play music. It was incredible. She wrote it herself, all this, right? She told me about how she's trying to become famous, and she's got people in her family, and then she told me that she had problems that she couldn't talk about, and I tried to press her, which I had problems I couldn't talk about. So after her, she said no, I'm not going to tell you. I said okay, and we were not friends. She seemed like she didn't have time, and then a year later she died. Killed herself. And the question is, what is the darkness that's going on down there? What can we do about it? And what would it mean for the rest of the world if we did? I guess my theory is actually that if we could essentially cure the general insanity of the human race, general insanity, more or less alluding to whatever is going on in our childhoods that creates murderers and rapists and especially pedophiles. And on a smaller scale, you have people with very unhealthy kinks and quirks in bed, things that actually damage them over time, right? They have people do sexual things to them that, they might not really let themselves be bothered by it for 20 years, but eventually they have a breakdown moment where they realize, why in the world have I been acting this way? And you go most of your life without actually digging into these just little quirks, little flaws, little things that could change the very dynamic and structure of who you are. They could be changes so massive. You could go from working at a gas station to working for NASA. You just don't know. You don't know how much power you have, that you're more or less just, how you say, shoving into a corner. It's like being a hoarder, right? And then you put a blanket over that corner so that you don't feel like there's anything in that corner anymore, but it's really just a bunch of stuff that was probably really valuable, and you have not organized it into something usable yet. So the whole process of yoga and Zen is actually doing that, except it's the predecessor, right? And psychoanalysis is more or less the capitalist, like Plato's Republic version, where you have a very rationalist, very left brain, logical perspective on what the world is like and what people are going through, and how to get at them, how to break them down, how to find out what the real problem is, and so on. Where yoga was never like that. Yoga is the how you say, it's the child of Ayurveda. So yoga is the science of the body, including the mind. And then alchemy would be the science of the environment. The alchemy would just be, how the flint and whatever else makes a fire. And then the fire and the cooking makes food that tastes different, and it makes you feel different. That's the original alchemy. Original alchemy was not about turning lead to gold. That was just another person out there with a big idea, and they did not make it happen. Probably because there were things going on in the world that they should have been addressing first and did not, and they went ahead anyway. And dumb things can happen. You can turn into Madame Blavatsky and start stringing up tables and shaking up rooms just so that you can get some attention and validate your claims. But the reality is, they're in the spirit of what things really are. Quantum phenomena, essentially quanta stacked on top of each other, and we don't completely understand how the particles are not being made. The particles actually are just here, and they're changing. They're essentially like building blocks that have been made solid, and they have some sort of lifespan or something. Radioactive atoms have a decay, and it goes for billions of years, and eventually they do disappear. Everything eventually does disappear. So it has to more or less erupt out of this infinitely fine quanta. And the spirit of that is that anything is possible, right? And you don't need to go somewhere else. You're here for a reason. You don't need to go open a door to some quantum multiverse and find dragons and all this, when you actually have real circumstances here that are personal to you, that you want to be working on, and you can actually leverage the structure of reality, the nature of what you are, a brain. You can leverage that to your advantage. It may not end up that you get the $1 million that you want right now, but it will end up that you'll get something done. And in the spirit of actually getting work done as a member of a species, you work for your species, and the species works for the planet works for the system for the galaxy, and so on. So what are you going to do aside from just improve what you have? What does anybody need all this fantasy for when all we have is what we have? We are who we are. We're born the way that we're born.